Welcome to Power BI for Government number 3. It's fantastic to have you all here. And as we're all continuing to come in, look, really good to be part of the, Power BI for Government community of practice. So we're all about being able to share, collaborate, learn from one another and what everyone is doing in the world of Power BI in the government space. All right, so just a little bit of housekeeping. So there's a lot of attendees here. So what we're going to do as the presenters are presenting, please, if you have a question, just raise your hand. So you know the hand raising emoji, and I'm going to moderate the questions as we have a lot of attendees. Please do mute your microphone as you jump in. It's a webinar, which means we all can talk at the same time. I will record the session, so don't stress if you need to leave early. If you want to share it with somebody else, one of your colleagues, I will put it up on YouTube and I will send an email out probably Thursday with the slides and also the recording of today's session. A little bit about myself, if you're not sure who I am. So I'm Warren Dean. I run a company called Datatail. We work essentially providing Power BI services for people in government. So I've done Power BI training for nearly 300 people, end-to-end development, best practice, development reports. So if you need support in the Power BI space, please feel free to yell out. You have my contact details. So for those of you here for the first time, what is the community of practice? So the community of practice is essentially allowing us to connect, to learn, to discuss about Power BI and what and how it's being used across the government sector. So user stories, we've got 3 user stories today, learning, Power BI updates. This is essentially what we're about. Now, thank you for those who have reached out and provided feedback on some ways you would like to improve the community. So, GitHub was a suggestion, being able to network in some of these events, being able to actually collaborate. So there's been a few feedback, and what I'd love to do is make this a community of practice where, we're all able to voice our opinions and we're able to build and make something that's actually of benefit to you. So I have created, I think it's a 9-question feedback form. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to drop it in the chat. And if you have any feedback that you would like to give, ways that we can improve this community that maybe you've seen somewhere else, somewhere that you might think is beneficial, I will just drop it in the chat now. As we're going through the presentations, feel free to fill it out. You don't have to leave your details if you don't want to, but it would be great to know how you think this community could evolve and improve and provide value for you. So I've dropped the link in there, so feel free to fill that out. It's only about 9 questions. Last thing before we jump into the event is I have created a LinkedIn group, and I started adding people, and then because there's like 100 of us, I got a bit tired of adding people. So if you are interested in jumping into the LinkedIn group, I'll pop a link in the chat. Just click on it and join and I'll add you. And sorry, that's just because I'm lazy and I didn't want to one by one add you all in. But that's just a way I thought that we could collaborate. If you have questions, I'd love this for a place to be. If I'm working on Tech 1 and I've got an issue with an SQL script, I want to drop my question there and see if someone in the community can help me. I've got some issues with Power BI. It's throwing me this error. I'd love that this is just a place where you can pop your questions in, and not just me, people from the community can be on there and kind of support each other. So we'll trial it and see how it goes. But if you want to be part of that type of community, I'll also drop a link in there and you can just click on it and join the group on LinkedIn. So for Power BI Government Community of Practice number 4, we have 3 presentations next quarter. So if Anthony, Russell and Niall, and they're going to be talking, Anthony's going to be talking about V-Line operational performance dashboard that he's built. Russell's going to be looking at the benefits realization reporting report that he has built. And Niall's going to look at connecting to open APIs with Power BI. And his is a bit more of a learning demo, so that'll be really good. Encourage you all to come along to that session. The date is not set in stone, but it will be sometime in May. I'll send meeting invites out for that a little bit later.
How was tape today, Dol?
Oh, sorry. Yes, if you just want to drop yourselves on mute. But let's jump into our session. Today we have Eric and Aryan are going to be talking on the first one about creating a portal for data-driven decision making. So I'm not going to take over. I'll let them introduce themselves, explain a little bit about their role, and jump in to their presentation. If you do have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll moderate a bit of a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Aryan, if you want to share, and the mic is yours.
Thanks very much, Warren. I'll let Aryan bring up our presentation, but good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name's Eric Connerton, and I'll be presenting to you with my colleague, Aryan Shrestha, and we're from Bayside Council in New South Wales, and we're really excited to share with you our business intelligence journey so far. Our presentation this afternoon will be in two parts. The first part will focus on how we're providing resources to support a culture of data-driven decision-making at Bayside Council, focusing really on the human and user experience side of things. The second part will touch on the more technical elements and include a live demo of one of our Power BI reports. So, on embarking on our Power BI journey about 24 months ago, our aim was to put easily accessible data in the hands of decision makers to really create that data-driven culture. While historically data was available to some users, it needed to be extracted from a poorly maintained Microsoft SQL reports portal, or it had to be extracted by a database administrator who would generate and execute bespoke queries for individual users. As such, historically, data-driven decision-making was often placed in the too hard basket. Further, data was spread across disparate systems, which didn't provide decision-makers a consolidated view. Data had to be manually aggregated and manipulated for analysis to occur. So, the approach that Bayside Council has taken is rather than pushing people to an unfamiliar environment of Power BI Online with its associated foreign concepts of workspaces, we instead decided to keep users within an environment they're quite comfortable with. Our experience is that new system deployments often result in poor uptake if there's a steep learning curve. So in this case, we've decided to leverage a platform most users are familiar with, that being SharePoint. So what we did is we created a new SharePoint site, which we titled Bayside Intelligence, that uses a graphic button-based navigation, which is incredibly familiar to users. Our approach was to create a one-stop shop that really leveraged data from all of Council's different systems. We've got information being fed into there from Council's HR system, where Bayside Council uses iCris, our rating, CRM and property system, and we're users of Import Pathway, and even as far as our parking enforcement system, which is Pinforce, as well as our call center and after-hours service phone call system, which is Well Done and Premiere. So we embed Power BI reports into individual SharePoint pages so a user is able to interact with them and achieve almost the entire functionality of Power BI while staying within an environment they're quite comfortable and familiar with. The same button-style navigation also flows down to the individual reports, where we've created a single report with multiple tiers of information. Having multiple tiers or multiple pages allows reports to be flexible enough to cater to a wide audience base. Each report presents bite-sized key indicators relevant to a particular audience, whether they be our general manager, director, department managers, or team leaders. And information is continually presented at a more granular level as you work down the organizational structure. Multiple tiers of information were incredibly important to our approach to deployment as we used a top-down approach for adoption. We first started with our general manager, followed by our executive directors, and then onto our business unit managers, and then onto select team leaders and coordinators. By having our general manager and executive refer to the portal and obtain data from the portal to influence their decision-making, that naturally influenced the behavior of managers, which naturally influences the behavior of team leaders and coordinators. Taking this top-down approach saw a very strong level of adoption amongst our leadership team. Finally, we also used an agile approach of deploying early and deploying often. Based on user feedback, we refine our reports, and we continue to add new functionality. We also deploy internal communications in the shape of a monthly newsletter to our Power BI user base that advises them of new developments, tells data stories, and continually drives traffic back to the hub. The example that's currently on screen is an example of a refinement that was made at using feedback from a manager. This manager wanted to see all open CRMs that are currently allocated to a staff member that directly or indirectly reports to them. Now, for those that work within local government in Australia and are familiar with Infor Pathway, you would know that such a report is actually impossible to generate via Pathway natively, as Pathway has no understanding of the organisational structure or the organisational hierarchy. However, using Power BI, we're able to aggregate data from our HR system along with Pathway data to present such a report. So taking a very user-centric approach and really focusing on the user experience, user outcomes, and user adoption, we've been able to build a layer of management that really embraces data. We've also improved the availability of data across councils by pursuing our Power BI journey. We've accelerated councils' transition to a data lake, allowing us to pool data across multiple applications. This means more of our data is available for analysis, which means more insights can be served back to the business. We're also taking a very user-centric approach, seeking input from our users to know their requirements. As such, we've always been able to deliver reports which are very much fit for purpose. Too often, data architects take the approach of, we have this information, how can we display it? The approach we've taken is very much, what does the business need to know, and how can we best provide this information to influence decision-making? We've also increased the availability to data by rolling out shortcuts across desktop computers, tablets, and even onto mobile phones. The mobile nativity of SharePoint's really allowed us to put data in the fingertips of users very literally. And finally, we've been able to improve skills and knowledge through the provision of support materials that are on our SharePoint site. So we've told users and instructed them how to use slices, how to export visualizations, or even how to export underlying tables for their own reporting. As I noted before, previously users had to request bespoke exports to be undertaken by a database administrator, but now they're able to undertake that data exercise themselves. I'll hand over to Aryan now, who will be able to provide you a live demonstration of one of our reports currently sitting on our Bayside Intelligence portal.
Thank you, Eric. Hope you guys can hear me. Hello, my name is Aryan Shrestha, and I will be demonstrating the Bayside Council's historic CRM report. This is the homepage of the report, and as you may have noticed, we have implemented consistent navigation approach throughout the environment with the use of similar icon buttons for more welcoming user experience. For demonstration today, we will be looking into graphs and heat map page. So what you're viewing is the Council's CRM data for the financial year 2021 and 21-22. We have set the default filter initially so that the user does not get overwhelmed with the huge number of data. We can see the total number of requests Council closed for the time period with the help of top left card. We can see the volume of requests spread across with the help of the line graph. The data is also sliced using the visualization by contact type and requester type. The bottom left table provides more detail to the user by cutting the data into subcategories, average days taken to finish this request, its total volume, and the percentage of it falling outside the SLA. The reason we have used this visualization is so that we can provide insights to the manager so that they can make data-driven decisions to satisfy the needs of the community. So for example, the manager of Western Cleansing would like to view how his team is doing in terms of requests they're receiving. He can use the slicer presented here and can identify that residential bin request is the most in demand type of request he receives. Now he can further analyze the data using the slicer and delve more into the request. Just going to use the slicer here to get the residential bin. Okay. So the manager can identify if there are any trends and if there are any more requests coming in throughout the year. Upon closely looking at the historic request, we can clearly see that there are peaks during the summer period of December and February. We believe this is due to residents staying home more often during those months with school breaks and festivals. So such prediction can be made for the first lockdown as well that Sydney imposed during the March of 2021. And we predicted that there would be more similar requests as well, as people will be staying indoors and working from home. The data also shows that there has been a higher peak during those lockdown period as well, as indicated by the dark blue line. With these findings, manager now can take decisions in terms of resourcing to better prepare the team to meet the increased demands. Now we are simply going to clear all the filters we've applied by using the clear button filter down below, which is a Power BI bookmark functionality. Using bookmarks is a great way to add navigation and improve user experience to the report. We are now going to view a similar example with a different business unit called compliance and certification. The manager now can use the slicer again and view their team more in detail and can identify that illegal parking is the most common request that their team receive. Now they can go into here, the slicer, and use illegal parking to see if there's any trends that appear. As we can see in the line graph, there is a decrease in demand during the first lockdown of COVID at April 2020. This is denoted by the dark blue line here. We believe that people staying indoors made them illegally park less. Based on this knowledge, we predicted that there will be a decrease in illegal parking again when there's a second lockdown that Sydney experienced in the August 2021. And the similar trend was also shown with the light blue line there when there was another lockdown. So with this knowledge, the manager can adjust the team resourcing to meet the decreased level of demand by reducing the casual and overtime hours. Now we are simply going to go to the home page, which is also a bookmark, to navigate to our home page. Now we're going to look into the heat map. So those trends in time does help us make those data-driven decisions. But the geographical area of where the requests are coming from also help us make those valuable insights. So what we are looking here is a heat map for illegally parking requests. We can see that great number of requests are coming from the busy streets of Brighton-les Sands and Sandringham. This insight actually led us to another project of installing CCTV cameras with license plate recognition capability on Bay Street and Vanstone Parade. So the data really help us not only making resourcing decisions, but also take on future projects to make the community a better place. Thank you, everyone, and I will now hand over back to Eric.
Thanks very much, Aryan. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you all very much for your attention this afternoon. My name again is Eric Connerton, and I've been joined by Aryan Shrestha, and we're from Bayside Council in New South Wales. I do believe we have some time for questions, but if you do want to get in contact with Aryan or I, our email addresses are on screen, and please do feel free to connect with both of us on LinkedIn.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Aryan. Great presentation. One thing I loved was, having the one-stop shop and then driving everything back to there. So everyone has a question, they're looking and searching. We're all coming back to this portal, and all your information is there. So that's fantastic. And thanks, Aryan, also for showing some really good use cases there and how you've used the tool to actually make decisions. I noticed there's some questions in the chat. Have you answered them, Eric, or do you want me to go through them?
I answered one about our How Do I guides, and our How Do I guides are really simple PDFs that show a click-by-click instruction how to complete an action. So, how to export a visual, how to export an underlying table. So we're kind of taking that approach of teaching a person to fish, because we're trying to make the organizations far more self-sufficient in obtaining their own data to make that data-informed decision-making.
Excellent. All right, lots of questions in the chat, so let me go through. Now, someone else can probably answer, but does publishing via SharePoint depend on the Power BI server? Presumably at least needs pro license to publish and view. Okay, so that's a question about the pro license, Eric. Did you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so it does require a pro license to view. So to publish to SharePoint Online. You are able to publish to web, and then users without a pro license are able to consume that. But that does mean that Power BI report is in the public domain. With some of our reports, they do contain some confidential information. So we've chosen to allocate Power BI licenses to individuals to allow us to ensure that the publishing of those reports remains within the confidential domain of Council.
Yeah, and look, just a note, I'm not sure if anyone's seen as well, you can also publish to teams. So you can put it in a team, you can add things in there. But the good thing about this solution is, again, everyone's coming to the one place, which is really good for adoption across the organization.
Yeah.
Is that a question? Michael's asking, I've rolled out Power BI apps. Yep, as a great for navigation. Yes, they are. However, these don't appear compatible with SharePoint. I don't think they are, unless anyone can correct me. No. So, yep, some great presentations, and looks like these aren't questions, but a lot of appreciation. Does anyone have a question? Feel free to raise your. Oh, hang on. Sorry, here's one from Matt. How did you go about centralizing data? Was there any kind of lessons learned to help with presentation layers?
So at first, when we started on this journey about 24 months ago, we were taking data from very, very disparate sources, some of them being uploaded manually, some of those sitting in DB, some of those sitting in SQL servers. The organization has made it part of their organizational goals to transition to that data lake model where information is sitting all in one environment. And I think our team pursuing this Power BI journey, and to provide some clarity, Aryan and I sit in a business improvement team, which is completely independent of our IT team. We're very much focused as acting as consultants for the business rather than just advocating for one area. And by us kind of perpetuating this journey around business intelligence has actually forced the hand of the organization to move faster in tackling that data lake.
Excellent. And Andrew has a question. Are your individuals given pro licenses or a different SKU? So are you pro or premium?
We are pro, so we don't have a premium capacity. An organization of our scale hasn't reached that tipping point where a premium capacity delivers a return on investment. And certainly there are some things that we'd like to do in the future, such as the generation of PDF PDF exports that you can integrate into Power Automate, which are limited to a premium capacity, are things that we'd really like to tackle in the future. But as an organisation of 750 staff, we're a mid to large size council in New South Wales. Unfortunately, the licensing costs of a premium capacity at $6,000 to $7,000 per month, unfortunately, just doesn't make economic sense at this moment in time.
Yeah, excellent. All right, questions keep coming. What is the data lake tool that you guys used?
So unfortunately, because Aryan and I don't fit within an IT team, this is the mystical world of IT that Aryan and I don't understand. So unfortunately, I can't shed light on that. Perhaps somebody else that's attending today that is more specialist in that area might be able to shed some light there.
Yeah, look, it depends. You could have used many different things, so that's all good. We can move on. That one, self-service. So this is an interesting question from Natasha. Do you allow self-service? So let's say, for example, that report that you built, would you allow someone else in the business to connect to that data set and build out their own report?
So with some reports, we certainly do. We allow, with the permissions that we allocate in the Power BI online service to connect to data sets, we do allow the data set to be reused for further report generation. With others, we lock it down as they pertain to confidential information, which is specific to a team.
Yeah, excellent. Another kind of infrastructure question, so we'll skip over Data Lake Data Warehouse, but thank you guys, appreciate your time. Really fascinating, really good to see people thinking out the box and doing something definitely user-centric design showcase there. So thank you, Eric and Aryan.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Ed. Ed, I'll let you, you're happy to take over the screen and introduce yourself. He's going to be talking about REST APIs and within Power BI, which will be really interesting.
All right. Can someone let me know if you can see my Power BI slides? I mean, my PowerPoint slides.
Yep.
Okay, that's great.
You're not in presentation mode, if that's what you were thinking, though. We can see your we can see all your notes.
No worries, that's fine. I've got nothing to hide. Okay, is the slide big enough though?
Yeah, I think it's okay. Yeah.
All right. So, all right, thanks, Warren, for the invitation and welcome everyone. I'll talk about how I've been using the Power BI REST API at my organization. So this is coming very much from an admin perspective, though. So I'll show one brief report, but yeah, this is very much from an admin perspective. So I'll show some slides for context. And then I can show you the Power Query code. I can go through that in detail if I have time, but this is mostly just a sort of like an overview of how I've been using the admin API. The code is in the Power BI Full Gov GitHub repo, if any of you guys want it. So just a little bit about my organization. So I work for the Department of Planning and Environment, which is sort of closely associated with the Department of Regional New South Wales in New South Wales. And these two organizations do things like land use planning. We do things like environment, energy and science, property. There's Crown lands in there, there's water planning, national parks and wildlife, there's a soil conservation service. So anything that really has to do with land or air or planning is in our domain. And I work for a central area called Digital Information Office, and I guess we are the ICT provider for the cluster. And specifically, I work in the data analytics team. And as you can see on the slide, I've got a large number of roles. So my team administers the Power BI platform. We also look after an Azure data platform, which we use and also business areas use, which includes things like Azure Data Lake and Data Factory and SQL. We also do solution architecture and delivery. We look after assignment of Power BI licenses and some permissions as well in the Power BI tenant. And so my developers are primarily engaged most of their time in data engineering. But obviously we do things like prototyping, and I maintain a user group internally, and we provide help to anyone who wants to use the platform. In terms of our technology, we have, we're very much a Microsoft shop, and each of our users, so there's about 15,000 people in our government cluster, and we have Microsoft 365 E3 licenses, so everyone gets a Power BI standard license for free. We have about 320 workspaces in Power BI. We have Power BI Premium P1 node, which enables us to share with an unlimited number of internal and external email addresses. We have about, at the moment, we have about 250 pro licenses assigned to report developers who are curating all kinds of content in our tenant. We have about 270 licenses purchased at the moment. So Power BI has been implemented in the agency since, well, I think it was in 2015 when I first sort of was involved in the project to implement Power BI. We use the on-premises data gateway to connect to internal data sources. Well, we have a few gateways. And as you can see from the slide, we have a Power BI platform which I guess business areas use, but also for data engineers, we have our Azure data platform, which is primarily what my team uses for data engineering. So we use things like Azure SQL and Data Factory. We use Python scripting for more granular control of data. We use Azure Data Lake to store data or blob storage, and some business areas are using machine learning in Azure, and also Databricks for a couple of sort of niche solutions for where there's higher volume of data. So what I've tried to represent in this slide is the fact that these two platforms, Power BI and Azure, very much integrate, and I've used Azure Data Lake in my REST API solution. In terms of the data sources, we use Salesforce and Pega for our sort of case management and CRM, but increasingly business areas are using things like Dataverse and SharePoint lists and forms and Power Automate, and also Power Apps to sort of carry out their business function. And I've got business teams use connect to Excel and also any other sort of SaaS products like, Monday.com or, some other web service. So all of this activity, particularly on the Power BI side, we have about 700 report views on average every day. We have about 5,000 report viewers on average. And there is like constant activity. So as a Power BI admin, part of my job is to monitor the tenant, see if I can optimize, and just basically keep things running as best I can. In terms of what my high level requirements were when I first sort of thought about the Power BI REST API, I was primarily thinking about is Power BI providing value commensurate, with the investment we're putting in. So obviously, we have a P1 node which is costing us $6,000 a month, and we have 270 pro licenses at $13 a user a month. So it's for a top tier sort of government cluster, it's not that much for a report and analytics platform, but still it's my duty to make sure we're getting value for our investment. So I'm looking at value, I'm looking at adoption. So how widely are the reports being shared? Is it primarily within business units? Is it between business units? Is all the activity taken up in 2 business units across the whole cluster? And also things like usage, how many report views are there? How many data sets are getting refreshed? When are they refreshed? and also usage, like, what are the most active business units? Who are the Power BI champions who are doing things in Power BI? Who are the most active consumers? And also regarding pro licenses, our staff who have requested pro licenses, are they actually using those pro licenses? Who are the most active developers? What are the most used data sources? Like, is everyone just importing Excel, or are they using SQL Server or Dataverse? Should I govern those data sources? And if I do govern those data sources, what are the impacts? And also permissions. So who has access to which reports? So in terms of permissions, I'm thinking more along the lines of an audit trail, and that's mostly for business areas to govern their own content, because business units often can't remember or don't know how to check who has access, particularly if the content has transferred ownership, okay, or someone has left the organization. So I'm just going to switch over to my browser. If I just go into the Power BI REST API, I can see that I'm only really looking at the admin functions, but even as a Power BI, as a standard non-admin person, there is loads of value which I can get from the REST API. But in terms of admin, I am primarily looking at, getting a list of dashboards, or getting a list of reports. Perhaps most importantly, I want to get a list of workspaces and a list of those reports in those workspaces. And what I noticed is perhaps the most important one which I accessed was the get activity events. Okay, so this is a REST API endpoint where I can get all the activities which have happened in our tenant between a start time and end date time, right? So so when I'm thinking about the data model which I'm going to build for this reporting solution, my activity events data is going to be the fact table. So most of the things in the REST API are related to operations that you can do, or what I would call dimensions, or attributes about the artifacts in the tenant. So getting a list of dashboards, that becomes a dimension in my data model. And activity events is really the only fact which I can see, all right? It's the only list of transactions. So if I just go back to the slide for a second. So I just went through the REST API, and from looking at the REST API, I can build a conceptual data model, right? Just bear with me a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so if I look at my conceptual data model, which I was going to build, I've got some dimensions which I want to bring into the data model. So I've got some dates on the left-hand side. I've got people from my corporate data warehouse. I've got a list of pro licenses from the Microsoft Graph API. And out of the Power BI REST API, I'm going to get a list of workspaces, and I'm going to get the other artifacts, as you can see here, right? A list of objects, and also their user access permissions. Okay, so this is these are all individual endpoints which I'm querying, and down here I've got my fact table, which are the activities themselves. So this is not a true star schema. This is, I guess you'd call it a snowflake schema, but I need to really update this design to sort of link these dimensions here with the main sort of fact table activity events. All right, so if I just go through a demo of the report, in Power BI, I'm going to open the report which I've built so far. This report has basic information, and it's really a prototype solution. So a lot of this will change over the next few sort of weeks and months as I get time. As I said, it's not my primary role, so I'm sort of doing it in my spare time. So I get a sort of number of reports. I get a number of report views. Most helpfully, I get a report views over time. So there's an average of about 570 since July 2021, and there's a report views by workspace, which is very handy because business areas have been asking for that information. In terms of pro licenses, I found this was extremely helpful. So I can see in this table which pro license holders are actually using their pro licenses for something other than just viewing a report. So I can see all these true values here. I can get in touch with them and say, do you still need your pro license? In terms of workspaces, this is just me sort of listing out the workspaces we have in our tenants, and there's a data set refreshes graph here, but there is a lot more that I can do with this information. In terms of the data model, so I'll just go back a step to Power BI. If you look at the lineage in this workspace, so here's the report on the left. Okay, I've got the report here. Here is my what I'm calling a Power BI audit data set here, and in that data set, I'm combining many data flows. I've got my employees dimension, like my people. I've got my access permissions. I've got my reference data in here, which actually contains all of the artifacts like workspaces and data sets. I've got my pro licenses there. I've got my date table. All of these are data flows, and the data flows are being consumed by Power BI desktop. And as you can see, my data sources are a SQL Server on the left. I've got a time and date or web service coming into my calendar. I've got Azure SQL and I've got Azure Data Lake. All right, so all of that technology is used in this data model. If I go to the source workspace itself, okay, because I've got my reports and my data set split across two workspaces, so all of my data flows are in this particular workspace. I was going to go through, I'll just go through the Power Query very quickly. I won't do it in the browser because it may take a long time to load, but I'll just give you an idea very quickly of the code. So if I look at, let's say I want to get the activity, okay, because that's probably my most important. If we look at this Power Query, what I'm doing is I'm defining a function right at the top. I outline my source, right, which is the Power BI REST API endpoint. I start a loop where I'm going to iterate through that REST API endpoint up to 100 records, because that's the limit, or until a continuation token is null. So I'm using a combination of the API endpoint and a token, and I'm iterating through the results and appending them into a list if there is a continuation token returned, or if the loop number reaches a certain point. So that's how I'm getting all of my activity. And as you can see here, I'm actually introducing a start and end date time. So I'm only getting 1 day's worth of activity events, and that's yesterday. And that's been going since the middle of 2020, I think. So I can get the historic data if I contact Microsoft, but yeah, I only started it. I imported a lot of historical data, and then going forward, I'm only importing a day's worth of data. If we look at one other thing, I'm using an access token, and I'm querying the Microsoft authentication endpoint. I'm just returning the access token using username and password, and I'm using that access token in my other queries. Again, I'm not going to go through all of this Power Query, but it's all available in the Power BI for Gov GitHub. Some of the challenges I've found in using Power Query online, sometimes the editor crashes. So, make sure you save very often. And I found issues when you link data flows, upstream or downstream data flows. So if I'm developing with a data flow downstream, then I tend to use the Azure Data Lake CSV as a source. And I'm struggling at the moment with a 429 error, which means I'm making too many requests to Microsoft's endpoint, and so I got to get them to fix it or fix my code up. So, and my the Power BI model takes a long time to refresh. I need to optimize it, and there's a few other things, a few other niche errors which I've come across when doing things like reusing access tokens. Some of my next steps, well, I need to ask the business what they really want from the Power BI tenant information. And I may even create a service principal in Azure and just let them query the data themselves. I got to look at the data model. I got to design a true sort of star schema. Am I going to move this to Power Automate and Data Factory instead of consuming some of my Power BI premium capacity, with my requirements? I may look at Data Factory to do that. Maybe I can reuse the Power Query M code. And I need to sort of make a few changes to some of the objects. And I need to better organize the data flows, I feel. So that's just a little bit about what I've been up to in using the Power BI REST API. So as I say, I've been Power BI admin since 2015. So yeah, I've been on this journey for a good few years. There's my email if you want to get in touch, if you have any questions about Power BI or the REST API. And I'll hand back to Warren. Thank you, guys.
Excellent. Thanks, Ed. We'll have a look if there's any questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat. Are you aligning SharePoint workspaces and Power BI workspaces?
Yeah, that's a good point. So a couple of years ago, I decoupled, following when Microsoft decoupled Office 365 groups and SharePoint sites with Power BI workspaces, and then they enabled Power BI admins to switch off the creation of V1 workspaces. So in effect, no, I am not aligning Power BI workspaces with SharePoint sites. They are completely independent. And in fact, I've found that aligning them just creates more problems in my experience.
Excellent. Next question. If the Power Query only gets yesterday's activities, then should there be another ETL process that captures data longer term?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the reason why it only gets yesterday's activities is because you can only query, I believe, a month back from the REST API. So at first, I used Power Query to get as far back as I could, because I think it's, at the time, you could literally only get data sort of back for 1 year, and within that you could only query 30 days. So I spent some time building up my historical data, but the Power Query for the activities is in a data flow, and so it sends the result to Azure Data Lake. So one thing I didn't show was my Azure Data Lake, which has got a whole bunch of CSVs in it. One which has a lot of historical data, and then a whole bunch which just contains daily data. But in effect, everything is getting sent to Azure Data Lake anyway, so it's all being captured. And then in the Power BI data set, in the data model, I'm just combining all of those CSVs into one.
Excellent. Any other questions? Sandeep said he's going to reach out. Okay. All good. Well, thanks, Ed. And what I'd really like to say is, like, obviously Ed's, quite experienced, and he's had a lot of history there in what he's built out, and is very kind to kind of share that to us privately as a group in the GitHub. So this is something that eventually you're going to have to think about, if you haven't already, in how do you administer Power BI across your organization. So if you would like access to the GitHub, I actually put in the form there. So just pop your email. There's a question there that says, I'd like access to the GitHub. Pop your email in there. It's a private GitHub at the moment, and I'll make sure that you have access and you can have a look at everything that's done. And I'm sure he'd appreciate if anyone there would love to improve the code or look at any of that stuff, that I'm sure Ed would really appreciate that as well. Excellent. Courtney, you're up next. Welcome. Have you had a coffee? You feeling good to go?
I have had a coffee. I'm ready to go. Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Thanks. I'll hand over to you.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for having me, Warren. So I'm an Australian, but I'm based in Paris at the moment. I have a background in a few different areas. So I worked with Warren at some stage in government. I have some background in engineering and consulting, and I moved over to France 3 years ago to do some study, and I ended up working at the OECD. So I'm here today to present some work that I'm doing at the OECD. And if you don't know the OECD, it's an international organization that does policy research, collects internationally comparable data. It's about 2,000 researchers in Paris so it's a think tank of really researchers, economists, policy analysts, data analysts who do research on a range of topics, from economic studies to studies on development in countries. And I work in a part of the OECD that looks at cities and regions. And so in particular, we look at, development of cities and regions, regional policy, how can we improve that? And so the work that we do really brings together data from around the world. We have a lot of people who compile that data. We then put it into databases that are available online, and we try to use that data to write reports and provide analysis. And I'll give a presentation today of one of our more recent projects, which was using Power BI really for the first time in the organization as a new way of displaying data. And so I'm going to talk about the OECD Regional Recovery Platform. And if I just jump straight into it here. So we've been producing a lot of reports, as I mentioned, and one of the reports during the COVID-19 crisis was on the territorial impact of the COVID-19. So on how to manage the crisis and recovery across levels of government. So giving examples from around the world, from all of the OECD countries, which is 38 member countries, on what different governments are doing. So really sharing knowledge, trying to improve everyone's understanding of the crisis during the crisis. And so the last report we did was in May 2021. This report's been downloaded at least a couple of 100,000 times. So it was a very popular report that we had at the OECD. And it showed a few things. In particular, it showed that really the impact of COVID within countries has been uneven across different parts of countries, and it showed the areas that it's been uneven. So, for example, we look at mortality and we can find that there's excess mortality is higher in some places than other, which means it's basically a way of measuring how many extra people are dying during this crisis, which is a bit sad and tragic, of course, but it's important to understand. We look at vaccination rates and how they vary across regions. And we also look at, I guess, digital connectivity and how that varies across regions. And so we were producing this report and realized that we really wanted to make sure that the data was going to be up to date. Frequently, it was a lot of work doing a written report, and we thought maybe it'd be better to present it in a Power BI format. And so the OECD has produced a few different recovery tools, which you can view on the OECD coronavirus website. And in particular, there's sort of a national level recovery dashboard that provides indicators for a range of countries along different indicators. And there's a subnational one, which is the one I'm talking about, which is a regional recovery platform, looking at how the recovery varies across different places within countries. And so what we do, we have a range of indicators. So we divide it into 4 sections. We have part which looks at the impact and recovery. So we look at really trying to get some statistics on what's going on with the crisis that's relatively up to date. It's hard to do the full automation. We have resilience indicators. So these are more like longer term data sets that we have available at the OECD on, for example, the number of hospitals in a region, or hospital beds, the number of doctors in a region, policy database, forward-looking scenarios. To give a little bit more detail on these, so for the impact and recovery indicators, these are kind of the more quantitative indicators that we have. We talk about vaccination rates, employment, unemployment, government revenues, expenditures, investments, and so on. With the resilience indicator, we talk about things like hospital beds, doctors, obesity rates, air quality, CO2 emissions, broadband access. And for the data sets, we have a range of policies that we created in a qualitative database, just as a way to collect that information, and then we can use it afterwards. And we also, it's not a live data thing, but it's just an element of the platform where we can show scenarios for what might happen to regional developments with the rise of remote working. So this is looking at the fact that the rise in remote working means you don't necessarily need to live in a city anymore, and thinking about what the long-term consequences of that might be for cities and regions. So will people be moving to the countryside? Will people be relocating to the suburbs of cities? And we just have a few very simple visualizations that were put on the website that we'd like to develop further in the future. I might do a quick demonstration now. So if you go to the OECD webpage, you can navigate through and you'll find your way eventually to this, or you can search for the platform itself. So essentially, we have an embedded public report with some of the key data, best viewed in a full screen mode, of course. And what we have here, we have a range of indicators. So this is part of the website that looks at the impact and database, looks at impact and recovery. So we have health indicators, employment indicators, and some national finance. Here we're looking at change in unemployment during the COVID crisis. And what this is showing is how unemployment's changed since the fourth quarter of 2019 up to the most recent data set. And so Power Query is filtering this data set that we have to work out what the most recent data is. And it shows the change in this. So for example, if I click on a country, maybe Greece, for example, we can see that in some parts of Greece, the islands in particular, there's been really large increases in unemployment during the crisis, 13 percentage point increase in unemployment. But in other parts of Greece, in Western Greece, for example, there's been a 4.7% decrease. So what you can see here is that the crisis really affected different places differently, which means then governments need to sort of tailor their actions and their responses based on that. If I go through some of the data sets, so we have a lot of different ones on employment and participation rates, youth participation rates. All of this is filterable. If we look at health, we have some data on excess mortality. So this is where you can look at how much of annual deaths increased per year. So we look at some regions in north of Italy, it's increased by 32%. So in this way, we're seeing really during 2020 there was a 30 percentage point increase in the number of annual deaths in some parts of Italy, but in some parts it was much lower. We can look at vaccination rates across region and see how that varies across different places within countries. So we've just used the same standard data set, and it's basically everything is being filtered at the moment. So this is range of vaccination rates within countries. We also have data on subnational finance. So here we're talking about government finances, and we're looking at how the government finances have been affected during the crisis. For example, we might see what's happened in the UK, and we see, okay, there's been an increase in grants and subsidies to subnational governments, in particular here, but there's been a decrease in taxes and in user charges and fees. And this is at an international really level. So maybe I'll go back to this for a second just to show another functionality quickly. So we also have time series. So this is quite interesting. So you can start looking at, for example, what unemployment's done in different places, states or regions within countries. And if we choose a country, maybe Australia, for example, we can see how unemployment's changed in different states by quarter. And we can compare that to another country that we might choose, maybe the United States. So we see, for example, the United States has had a much bigger increase in unemployment, but it decreased also quite suddenly. So you can start getting some analysis around on the differentiated effects. We kind of jump across to a range of different indicators that we have on the website using a lot of the data we have. This is air pollution over time. We have health indicators. I'll have a look at the resilience indicators. So we have, as I mentioned, health indicators and climate indicators and digital indicators. Maybe the digital is quite interesting to look at. So this graph here shows the deviation from country averages of a region in broadband download speeds. So we have data we collect from Ookla, which is where you do the speed tests. And in this, if we look at a country, we can see the average for the country, and we can see the percentage points above the average that the fastest region is versus the lowest region. And in Australia, we're quite good. It's quite a narrow gap between the region with the fastest and the slowest region. But in some countries, you can see in Canada and in Colombia, there's quite a big difference. So in Colombia, there's obviously the Northern Territories and the Yukon, which have much slower download speeds for broadband. And we also compare this as urban versus rural. You can have a play with the data more. And then maybe just moving on very quickly to the last couple of parts. So we have a policy data set. So we, as I mentioned earlier, collect a lot of examples from different countries and share them around the world to try and help countries develop good policies and to improve their policy making. And so this database collects a lot of examples, and we just have it in a standardized format. We're looking to develop this more and filter it more in the future. This was just a very basic data set to get started. It contains some key information about the reforms that have been done during COVID. And we have just some very simple images of what the future scenarios might be for cities and regions with the rise of remote working. So how will it change where people live? Will people start moving to intermediate cities? Will they start moving into the suburbs of cities? Just very quickly go back to the presentation. That's for over time. I know that's pretty much it. So there's the link to the platform. There's a short code if you want. I can stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions or describe in more detail. I mean, a couple of things maybe I'll mention. I don't know if many people here will work with publish to web, but it does have some limitations. You can't make the data downloadable directly. So we have the data stored in our other databases, which I can perhaps show you because they are quite useful depending on what you do. So we have large data sets available at the OECD. So this is OECD.stat, which has a lot of regional data, which is comparable across countries. So you can search on labour, economy, education, innovation, and you can even get an STMX input that goes directly to Power BI with these tables, which can be quite useful. And yeah, I think that's the main thing I'd highlight here. We also have other recovery dashboards that we do, which are more embedded in websites. So for here example, this is a national level one. It's a different sort of data set, so you can zoom in and you can see similar information that's been visualized, I think, using our Shiny. Okay. That's it.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Courtney. Great example, really good looking Power BI reports. And I think what I like is, the use of text there to give context to the report, something that we should all think about using as well. Is there any questions for Courtney? Apologies, we've gone over time, not Courtney's fault, that's my fault, but any questions for Courtney? No? Oh, good. Well, thank you for that stats link. So what I'll do is I'll put that stats link. I've also got the link to the report that you showcased as well. Definitely a lot of value in there. So yeah, thanks, Courtney. I really appreciate your presentation. Interesting. I'll be playing around with that one tonight. So thank you. Thanks, everyone. Oh, sorry. There is a question from Lisa. Interested in how you set up the key data. That's a good question because you've got a lot of data you're collecting from a lot of different sources. Do you know how you kind of structure and put that all together?
Yeah, sure. So so for the basic pages that you see, there's a couple of main data sets that we use. So one where you're doing the country comparison, we run some Power Queries to work out what the most recent data is for each region. So we flag that from our data set. And then we have a data set structured. So we have a couple of indexes that we use. So we have for countries, for region names, and for the indicators. And so when you choose a new indicator, actually I didn't show you on the dashboard, but so a lot of things filter at the same time. So the indicator will update the data that's displayed. It will also update all of the hyperlinks that are in the document. So all of the links at the bottom, which say data source, will actually go to a different location. So when you look at the digital data, it'll take you to a report that we did relating to the digital data. When you look at the subnational finance data, it'll take you to the subnational finance data. So we update the hyperlinks constantly as well. And so yeah, it's structured as really one big data set with a number of indexes that we filter across. The other thing for that, so we have another data set, which is the time series. So that's quite a substantial data set that we have that's just filtered by the two filters that you see by country and by region.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So no, just a few notes of appreciation. So what I'll do is I'll wrap up. Thank you, everyone. We'll get copies of the presentations, and I'll send that in email, and also the stats.oecd.org. That looks interesting. I'll send a link for that as well, and also the Power BI report that Courtney shared. So just a reminder, if you want access to the GitHub, just fill in that survey and put the email in. I'll also put that in the email. If you want access to the LinkedIn group so you can put questions and chat with one another, I will also put that in the email. So I'll edit this and get it out on YouTube in the next couple of days and send everyone an email. But very appreciative to our presenters, especially Courtney getting up so early. But thank you, everyone, again. I will see you all in May. Have a good day, everyone. I'll see you all later.